Welcome to another episode of God Yay or Nay. I'm here with Dr. Robin Mazumder. Dr. Robin, thank you for joining me, my man.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
No, this is going to be a lot of fun. So how do you describe yourself? Because I've heard, I saw on your website you would say like environmental neuroscientist. But like one
Yeah.
thing that I just love about your work, you're trying to like kind of build cities around mental health in mind, mental wellness. And I think that's just amazing kind of work. But like, I'll let you kind of describe yourself for the audience, please.
Sure. I guess in my professional life, I'm a neuroscientist. I did my PhD in cognitive neuroscience at the University of Waterloo and just finished up in October. But my research was really focused on how our environments, in urban environments, architecture, urban design, how that made people feel. And that interest was inspired by my work as a mental health clinician in community mental health as an occupational therapist, where I worked with people with schizophrenia, depression, across the board from kids to adults. And in the process, I just became quite, interested in how the surrounding environments in which we live really, interplay with our well-being and how we can, hopefully build environments that facilitate joy.
Yeah, that's amazing. Hey, like how cool is that though? And like from your like work, like because like as a neuroscientist, I guess that kind of means like you're measuring something, right? So like how do
Mhm.
you like how would you measure well-being when you're talking about like different environments we're in?
So we used wearable technology, which is something that, I've got my Apple Watch on. We're all wearing something. Most of us are wearing something these days that measures our physiological state from our heart rate variability or our heart rate itself. But I really focus on something called the electrodermal activity. It's a bit of a tongue twister, which is also known as the galvanic skin response, which is essentially uh, the rate of your sweat on your palms, which is a pretty good indicator of the state of your arousal or your stress. So we
Hmm.
would strap people with these sorts of devices on their wrists, and I would bring them out into the real world. I did some research in one of the main studies of my PhD was in London in the UK, where I was on fellowship a few years ago and again last year. And we took people to this area with all these tall buildings, and we were curious about how building height itself made people feel. That was kind of the focus of my PhD because, cities are building up at a really high rate. And so, what does the future look like if all we see are tall buildings? But yeah, that was basically one way I did it. And then the other thing I did was I put people in virtual reality. So we used 360-degree videos, VR headsets, and measured the same kind of body reactions, and also use psychological questionnaires to really get at what aspects of the environment were causing people to feel distress.
Yeah, that's really cool. So and like I guess it is like a lot of like trying to see like how stressful you are around different environments. So like when it came to like the tall buildings, what kind of conclusions did you come back with?
People found those settings to be aversive. They weren't as pleasant as the other settings. Building height does have an effect in your proximity to a building. So, if you have a tall building and you're here and the closer you are, the more intense this effect is, which some people would refer to as oppressiveness, which is related to a Japanese word called apakukan, which relates to this feeling of being enclosed or claustrophobic. And they actually use it in relation to buildings. So it's interesting to look at this kind of cross-cultural phenomenon and how in some cultures is actually something that's named and discussed and arguably hopefully addressed within how they design their cities.
Mm-hmm. So how
Yeah.
like what did you learn now like when you're designing a city, like what's a good way
Uh,
to actually like look? And I know you're not like designing cities at the moment, but
yeah.
like if we were to like
Sim
look,
City.
yeah, because like if we're looking at cities now and like what are ways that we can actually make them better for our well-being, like our mental health, like keeping that in mind.
Well, I mean, I think the pandemic has really forced everybody to consider what it is about their city that they enjoy or maybe even don't like. But, the absence of public life, we're coming back. There's been the waves, and we go from lockdown to having, picnic patio parties on our streets. And what I observe, and I've I've lived, I was living in London when the pandemic happened started in the UK, and I observed a change there. And what I loved about that city was its street life and how people occupied parks. I went from that to living in Edmonton with my sister in her basement for 3 months, to Victoria, where I grew up, and now I'm in Mexico City, where I came in December, as I mentioned. And I've been just observing how people operate, and at the end of the day, we need each other, and we need social connection. And I think if we consider that as kind of a foundation of how we should build our cities, we should consider ways in which design can facilitate connection and how art can facilitate conversations, but also just recognize that design itself is not really going to solve the problems. Black people are still being harassed by the police. Indigenous people, we got that news of those kids a couple of days ago, and sorry, I'm just, it really got me. Yeah, so there's all these other kind of layers of our environments that really impact how we function. So yeah, good design, but like, we need some social progress. We need to move forward and really advance how we relate to each other, and address these disparities that are caused by racism and misogyny and homophobia and things that don't make people feel comfortable in public space, which is what cities are all about.
Yeah, and isn't that weird though? Like, because it's cool. Like, we should be designing to like increase social interaction. Like, I found it so weird, like moving into like big cities. Like Toronto is where I was living the last few years, and like I couldn't believe like I went to the most population dense place I've ever lived in before, and I couldn't believe how more. I had less social interaction with people, and I don't know, like, have you ever thought about why that happens? Like, why when we're around so many people, we might end up getting like less social interaction?
Well, there's a number called the Dunbar number, which, as I understand it, was a number that was calculated on how many relationships we can actually maintain. And it was mapped onto I think our cortical volume. So, which is essentially, your brain is only capable of having so many friends. Cities might overwhelm that. That's one thing to consider. I think the number is like 180 or something like that. Don't quote me, but it's in that range. And the other thing is that if you look at what cities are built around, it's productivity. Bay Street in Toronto, it's like it's a commotion. The city is a place where people move through to get to work, which is awesome. I mean, like, work is great, but when one thing I noticed when I lived in Toronto, I did my master's there at U of T. Coming from a city like Victoria, which goes to bed at 10 p.m. and you have free range of the sidewalk. In Toronto, I was getting like knocked over constantly by people. Everyone's just like super, they're on their path. So I think these sorts of environments can sometimes, when we're so preoccupied with everything that's going on, we kind of forget what's around us, which is why green space is so important. Trinity Bellwoods Park in Toronto
Favorite.
because it's become an institution in itself of what a particular crowd does in the summers. But I think it's a good example of how space itself can be used to slow us down and maybe sit on a bench and contemplate or smile at someone.
And I love how you were talking about like when you were just walking down like Bay Street and it's just like all that commotion, and like you're right, like when you're around that kind of situation, you end up getting absorbed in it. Like, I remember moving there, I became more like, oh, now I'm more like career oriented, and I'm more like focused and driven and fast paced, and like, yeah, like you kind of start getting into that just from being around it. But yeah, you're right, that openness, like when you kind of go into those spacious areas, like it is a great way to just slow down.
Yeah, and I mean, look at like the majority of people in the core of Toronto live in apartment buildings, and I think that's a really important, a densification in population density and concentrating. That's very important. But the design of these spaces doesn't really facilitate connection. I mean, I lived at Yonge and Bloor, right above the Marriott for like 6 months during my PhD, or sorry, during my master's, and it was really interesting moving there from Harvard and Crawford and Little Italy, where I was before, you get out of your house, you see your neighbors, and there's the street life. And at Bloor and Young, I didn't know anyone on my floor, and I would get out of my building and you know uh, arrive to the hustle and bustle of people trying to rush to work or whatever. And it was just like this really different kind of vibe. And I think when you look at some of the research on the impact of condominium living, people I think do report being more lonely. So it's this interesting phenomenon.
Yeah, no, it's 100%. And like now add on like the increasing prices of like these places which aren't even
Yeah,
worth it,
yeah.
right? So like how like do you look at that problem of like now all these cities are growing around the world, and I think condos are basically the way we're solving this. Is there other ways to solve this, or like when if we are solving it with the condo or apartments or whatever, like what's a healthier way to do this?
I mean, it's a really challenging situation because if you look at, when I was living in London, I spent a lot of time traveling around. I went to Berlin and I went to Paris and even London itself, or Barcelona is another really great example. If you go to this core of the city, or even like not the core, just like the city within the city limits, single family dwelling units really aren't too common there, which means that people live in multifamily dwellings, or there's like what do you call them? A brownstone, or those like kind of walk ups. They have them in Montreal as
Yeah,
well.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Toronto's got them with its row housing. I mean, there are other ways to densify, and I think that some of the commentary which I read for my PhD was in psychology, but I was reading sociology just because I was interested in how people were kind of perceiving these skyscrapers. And some people talk about the notion that skyscrapers and really really tall buildings are essentially ways for very wealthy people to store their money in cities. And some people, I'm gonna stop saying some people. I would. I'm trying to deflect here and not get controversial, but I think we think that we have to build skyscrapers as a response to the necessity for density. But then you look at the number of surface parking lots that cover our cities, or how big our highways have to be for people to drive in from the suburbs. I think we're moving in this direction of responding to a problem that we created, and instead of actually addressing the original problem. And that, I think, Edmonton is a really good example of this. I was working with their zoning bylaw committee on their zoning bylaws using an equity lens, but fundamentally that city has changed its topography in its downtown core when you look at parking lots being turned into parks, or being turned into housing. So I don't think we need skyscrapers. There's something that in Canadian urbanism conversations, it's called the missing middle. So you got like single family dwellings, and you've got like a lot of people, like what's happening in the middle. Are there ways to kind of get at that?
I love
But I'm not
that.
an expert on that. That's just my opinion.
No, I get that. I get that. But I do love that whole idea, because you're right. It's like there is nothing in the middle. There's single houses, or then there's family houses, and it's just like
Hmm.
I think that's a great idea to kind of look at it. So you travel like so many cities. Like two things I want to kind of know. Like one, like what kind of lens do you have when you go to a new city? Because I bet you like,
Hmm.
like I'm a comedian. I'm constantly looking for like what's funny in a situation. So I guess that your expertise, like when you go to a city, like how do you look at the city when you go there? And then after, I'll ask after, but like after that, I just kind of want to know like what have you learned from like different cities around the world that we should like kind of bring back home.
I mean, I like chilling out. Like I really, really like lounging in different spaces. I like kind of like my stress level being a good 3 out of 10. So when I go to a city, I think I just naturally gravitate or seek out places that allow me to chill out. I mean,
Mhm.
fundamentally, I think I have a pretty hyperactive mind. And so, my environment does have not everyone is affected by their environment the same
Mhm.
way. We have different temperaments and different sensitivities. I just happen to be a very, very, very sensitive person. And so, I look for places that inspire me. I look like for art, what's interesting about what I look for, actually, it's I don't think that I'm consciously doing it. My eye just catches things, and then I just kind of find myself kind of following this path to, I just love going on walking adventures. I mean, in some cities that's a little not the best idea. I was staying in Centro Historical in Mexico City a few weeks ago, and it's the president lives there, and you've got like some of the most concentrated wealth in the country, and then right next to it you have Tepito, where if you walk down the wrong alley you'll get like kidnapped. And I'm not like I'm not a what's the word, exaggerating. I was going to say exacerbating. I'm not exaggerating. I've had numerous friends from Mexico City say like, don't do that. So I just try to look for places that are interesting, and during a pandemic it's been kind of, it's been an interesting process of learning about a city and experiencing it with the constraints of a pandemic that's trying to, people are trying to end this thing, so you can't go to the places you typically want to, but it's been interesting.
Nice. Have you seen like from cities around the world that like you kind of were like, you know what, I would love to bring this back to Canada, or this would work really well in Canada?
Yeah, I mean, Barcelona had this really cool thing called the super blocks, where they shut down streets within particular neighborhoods and then put like playgrounds and benches, and there was like a racetrack on the street where cars would typically be driving. I love that. I think it's just really small injections of joy and kind of whimsy. I like riding my bike. I don't own a car. It's how I get around. I think cycling infrastructure is something that we need in Canada, and you got to catch up. We're doing an okay job. I think something else that I really noticed when I was in Europe or even in Mexico City, there's such value to the investment in public art. You can take like a really dreary building and turn it into something that makes someone's say wow. And the more wows you have in a city, I think the more kind of positive energy people can kind of bounce off of and maybe use as a reserve when they're stressed out.
Heck yeah. And I agree with that so much, man. Like and you're right with that, like public art and stuff. I've seen it so many times where like you see something that like actually like just makes you go wow, and like it makes you feel good. It really does make you feel good. So let's I remember I was like looking up on you, and one thing I found that you said you went to Burning Man back in the day. And I love this because if people don't know Burning Man, like I might let you explain it a bit, but like they basically put like a city up in the middle of the desert for like a week. And it's just like a interesting thing. But like I want to know how this like kind of changed you, and like maybe even like kind of affected your direction in life or the way you look at cities as well.
That's a really good question. Yeah, so I went to Burning Man by mistake. There was a buddy of mine who I hadn't seen for a few years, and I was like, man, let's hang out this summer. He's in a band, and he's like, well, I'm going to Burning Man. I'm like, can I come? He's like, do you know what it is? I'm like, yeah, it's like a music festival in the desert. He's like, no, buddy, it's like it's full on. Like you have to prepare. You got to buy all your, flashlights and pounds of like, sunscreen and all this stuff. It's like a big kind of ordeal, right? But he's like, yeah, if we can get you a ticket, which is quite hard to do, you can come. So I ended up getting a ticket, and I went right after my first year or my first semester of my PhD. And I had no idea what the hell I was doing with my life. I was like, just quit my job and, started a PhD and was a student again. And I think I was also like pretty disenchanted with people. I was having a tough time with what was happening in the world at the time, and it seems like it never kind of ends. You get this constant like litany of bad news. But I went, and what's interesting about it is like as a sensitive person, I hate loud noise and being dirty. And this place is like basically a giant dust bowl with like a very, very loud electronic music playing in every direction at every moment of the day.
Yeah.
But it was probably one of the most profound experiences I've ever had, because you're in this very surreal environment. So yeah, for your listeners, from my perspective, Burning Man's essentially an experimental city that exists for a week. And there's a lot of things that happen at Burning Man. There's a lot of things associated with it, but it's also a city of 80,000 people. So there's families with their children. There's, tech bros. There's scientists. There's a camp for people with disabilities where they have a special vehicle to ensure that people in wheelchairs can experience all the art in the desert. There's like all these really
Wow.
Yeah, it's really beautiful. And the other thing about Burning Man is that it is, I think it is exclusive. I think a particular type of person can access it. It's expensive and it takes a lot of time. And so there is a bit of an issue of class and access and race. There aren't too many people of color at Burning Man. But all that said, I'm really grateful to have had the experience because there's no sponsorship there. Like Burning Man doesn't have like Pepsi sponsoring it, or even when DJs play there or anybody, like there's no ads. You just kind of find out, and it's about offering something back to this community that you're a part of that is actually about non-reciprocal giving. So gifting is a big thing there. They talk about radical inclusion. So everyone's invited. You make space for everybody. And for me, like I was like bullied as a kid, and I've got all these kind of traumas around not feeling included, and I working that out. But you go there and you're just like blasted with like complete, I don't know if love's the right word, but acceptance and interest by strangers, and then they end up being your friends for life. So, and you're seeing art that's like blowing your mind. Like at like 5 a.m. we went driving out on our art car to this pyramid that was built out of wood that was like burning with like little hurricanes spinning around it and people dancing around in lights. I mean, it's insane. Like
Yeah, that is.
you have these moments. I like took two of my best friends the last burn that happened because they canceled last year and this year's canceled in 2019. And I was like, I just can't wait for the moment I can just be like, hey guys, what did I tell you? And I remember that moment. We were out on our bikes the first night there, and we're biking out. And it's pitch black, and there's just like lights all around. And we see this green like beam in the distance. We're like, we have to go see what this is. It's like being kids. It's so awesome. And it turns out it was a giant stag vehicle, art car with like big antlers that were green. And there was this guy named what's his name? Seb Schwartz, I think. Anyways, he's like this German DJ that also plays a violin. And me and my buddies roll up, and then this guy starts playing the violin and like DJing, and my friends like looking at me, and I was like, yeah. And that's just like 10 minutes there, so you just have these constant experiences of awe, whether that's through like social connection or through seeing beautiful art or seeing a beautiful sunrise or sunset or the landscape. You're kind of in this constant state of having your mind blown. And I think that just really expands your perception of possibilities for this world, for cities, particularly around like how you can create community and make everyone feel welcome and give people experiences of joy. But for me, like I said, I was quite disenchanted around that time, and I came back just full of hope. So
Nice.
So I went back two more times.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
have to check out Burning Man. Every time I hear a story about it, I just like I'm like immediately just like enthralled with it. I'm like, I need to get down there.
Let me know.
All
I'll
right,
help
I'm
you out.
down. I'm down.
All right,
All
cool.
right, let's get back into your background a little bit, or into your background. So I want to kind of want to go back to your like when you were in occupational therapy, because I think this also like influenced a lot of your future. Well, of course it did. So like I'll tell you, my dad just had a stroke, so I know with occupational therapy
I'm
with
sorry.
him, yeah, it sucks, but he's getting better. And like a lot of with his occupational therapy, it's a lot of like doing the same exercises over and over again, like with his hand and stuff to get it working again. And that's kind of like a lot of his thing. But I think you were more occupational therapy and the mental health world, right?
Hmm.
Can you kind of explain like how that works? Like, is it the same kind of deal? Like you're doing like similar exercises with people over and over again to kind of help them, or how does that work?
Well, occupational therapy is really about so occupation means how you occupy yourself. So that can be any activity. from, brushing your teeth to being a comedian. It's a very, very broad term. And so the therapeutic aspect is how people, or how you can help people engage in these activities that give them a sense of well-being or meaning. And so, for stroke rehab, a lot of it is getting people back to be able to, being able to be independent or do things that were affected by that injury, right? In mental health, we use the same kind of lens where we're like, what is it that makes you happy? What is it that you want to do? A lot of it is vocational counseling, which is why people think occupational therapy is about, job coaching. But essentially, it's looking at someone within their context, within their environment, and saying, what is it that you enjoy doing, or perhaps need to do, through a collaborative conversation with the client. We don't like telling people what to do, but what is it that makes you happy, or what is it that you need to be able to thrive in your community? And so when I worked my first job, I worked at the Center for Addiction and Mental Health in Toronto on an inpatient schizophrenia unit. So people would, have a psychotic episode in the community, maybe become a little destabilized. They would come back to the unit, get back on whatever, medication or whatever they needed to reach stability. And then it was my job, to work alongside the psychiatrists and the social workers to say, how do we get this person back in their apartment, back in their home and living healthily, and what kinds of things can we give them, like art classes or yoga, or maybe finding them a volunteer position because they spend all of their day alone, not talking to anybody. There's all of these complexities to well-being. And so from the mental health perspective, it's really looking at that. And, we do therapy one-on-one. It's really, really diverse, but that would be, I guess, a somewhat concise
Yeah, no,
description of it.
I think that's very concise.
Yeah, I don't know. I ramble sometimes.
No, that wasn't rambling at all. No, that was very concise. Honestly,
Yeah.
I bet you would have like just gained the ability to listen to people like so well. Like I couldn't imagine, because like you were saying, you don't want to put any of your thoughts into them, because like you might be like, oh, you're going to enjoy this, but like you want to hear what their needs are and really like address their needs, right?
Yeah, and that's a really important point. I think something that I came to understand in my when I was working as a clinician was there's a power dynamic that's just inherent between a healthcare professional and a patient. Like think about your relationship with your doctor, right? There's like a power differential, but for a lot of these people, particularly people that I worked with in mental health, a lot of them, have a history of having their dignity violated, or not being believed, or just a number of traumas with the system. And so there's a big risk of them kind of wanting to do what you want in an effort to please you, or ensure that relationship is safe. And so, that's something that's extremely important. So listening is something that is a skill I've learned, and listening intently and asking questions to encourage people to share what they really want to do is a tricky business sometimes, especially if they're hesitant to be vulnerable.
Yeah, no kidding. And
Mhm.
I wouldn't doubt like just being in, because you were saying like you're in the ward where a lot of people had like schizophrenia and stuff. Like I would
Mm.
imagine that's a very hectic ward, and like I would imagine like your mental health's getting tested on a daily basis as well, right?
Oh yeah. I mean, I think anyone who works in a helping capacity needs to have a therapist, or at least some sort of process of understanding their own thoughts and developing some sense of objectivity, because you're constantly meeting with people who've experienced tremendous tragedy and trauma, and you have to be able to hear that and sit with that, and have some boundaries around to the extent to which it affects you. And I mean, I got burnt out. I left because I just wasn't it was tough. And I mean, the other thing too was I was also teaching at the time, as a sessional instructor, and really enjoyed that. So that's what kind of motivated my move to my PhD. But yeah, you really have to engage in self-care. And that's what I love about my experience with occupational therapy and being an occupational therapist, is it really reiterated the importance of having time for yourself. You know,
Mm-hmm.
you can't please everybody. You can't help out anybody if your cup isn't full. So it's not an impossible task to be a therapist, but it's something that requires a bit more than just showing up to work.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't imagine. And like, no, just from my dad, like he had a stroke back in Christmas time. So like just being and seeing all the healthcare workers around or him that like help him and like how much shit they have to go through as well. I have nothing but like gratefulness
Yeah,
and like, yeah,
nurses are amazing. I
yeah,
get much
honestly.
respect.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
like I have so much empathy for that. And like maybe we should like kind of talk can you tell us like what's the fulfilling part of that job? Because like I
Oh
know,
yeah,
yeah, because
totally.
I know there it
Yeah.
is like that burnout part, but like these people are so amazing and like I want to encourage people to go into these positions because like if you're helping
A
like this is
hundred
not the,
percent.
so like what are the like the fulfilling parts of this job?
Yeah, I should say, just at the time that I was dealing with that, I had some other things going on in my life where I just had too much going on. Like healthcare is a beautiful profession, and I join you in encouraging people to pursue it. And the things that I loved about it were just the connections that you make with people. You know, that listening part. I had a yeah, I can't share too many details because of confidentiality, but I had one client from a particular part of the world, and they missed that part of the world. And I managed to talk to the psychiatrist on the team to see if I can get the pass for him for the day. And we were in Toronto, and we went to the neighborhood where a lot of people from this part of the world hang out, and we had lunch and just walked in the park. And for me, like, I could do that whenever I wanted. I didn't even think twice but for him, it was just this. And we just had such a great conversation, and he was so happy. And to be able to facilitate that for someone who was not going through, was going through a tough time, and to be able to make someone smile, I mean, it's
That's
awesome.
amazing. Yeah.
And
And
and the other thing I should say that's awesome about it is just seeing change, seeing growth.
mm,
You get a lot of hope from seeing people heal and get healthy.
hell
You're
yeah.
reminded of why you do what you do. So
Hell yeah. I
yeah.
can't like anytime you see growth in anything that there is something that reminds you about like how life works and like I know I fucking yeah, I agree with that so much, man. And connection, that's the other thing you said. And I think that's so important because I think this whole podcast we've been talking about, like it does come down to connection. Like when we're talking about the cities, it's like how do we connect more to each other, more to the environment and like stuff like that because like you were even saying like a lot of the clients you had when you were a therapist they lived in seclusion all the time
Mhm.
and like
Mhm.
that can be like so unhealthy because the way you develop your worldview like it has absolutely zero connection with other people and like that could like make you develop like really bad stories for yourself about like how the world works,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, and a lot of these people are in seclusion after learning that the world works in a particular way based on their childhoods.
Mm.
It's really complicated, but people get better
Yeah,
with
and
other people.
with other people with the connection, baby.
Mhm.
No, that's yeah, that's great, man. All right, I want to kind of like talk about your spirituality a little bit. Maybe can you tell us a little bit about your background, your family and stuff, and like kind of
Sure.
like how your like whole spiritual progression went?
Yeah. So my mom is from India, from Lucknow, but ethnically my family is Bengali. Lucknow is in Uttar Pradesh, and she came to Canada when she was 12 in the 1970s to Revelstoke. Second brown family in the
Ha,
70s.
ha,
So
ha, ha, ha,
just,
ha, ha. Hey,
I'll leave it at that.
I was like one of the first brown families in High River, Alberta, so not too
Oh
far
my
from there.
gosh. Okay. So you understand, right?
I
It's not an easy
understand. I
place. Okay.
understand.
Yeah. So, that's my mom, and my dad is from Bangladesh, and he came to Canada in the 80s for school. And, um, you know, our families, we're quite proud Bengalis. And spirituality is a big part of the lives of my family, you know, in different variations. I mean, my grandmother's, my mom's mother and my dad's mother are both like, my dad's mother passed away about 20 something years ago, but my mom's mom, like Didu, as I call her, she's very spiritual. And you just kind of grow up with this culture, going to the temple and having pujas at your house, which are the celebrations. And, you know, as a kid, I was just fascinated by this whole culture. I mean, my grandma from Bangladesh, my dad's mom came to live with us when I was like, I think for about 5 years, 4 or 5 years. And I would, you know, come home from school. I didn't have any friends. I was like a nerdy brown kid. Okay. Like it. So I'd come home from school and, you know, while everyone else is playing with their friends, and I'd hang with my grandma and we watch, the kind of the epics like the Mahabharata and the Ramayana, which are kind of like the Homer's Odyssey of Hinduism.
Yeah.
And so I was always just super curious. When we went to India, you know, I was like very intent that we would go to the temples and the Sri Ramakrishna mission, and you know, all these places that pilgrims go to, you know, I was like 7 and just like, Mom, let's go, and you know, hanging out with the priests and stuff. So I've just always had this kind of spiritual inclination. But you know, in my teens and my early university years, and when I was in my, I guess, my 20s, I just kind of considered myself an atheist, like a hard scientist atheist. But then I had a really rough patch, pretty severe depression. I almost like flunked out of school. And that's when you know, that's when I really started to reconnect with my sense of spirituality. And around that time as well, my mom encouraged me to do yoga. And so ever since then, I'm very fascinated by different wisdom traditions, and kind of approaching them with a sense of curiosity, with a bit of skepticism, which I think is healthy as a scientist to, you know, ask questions. And you know, I got to the point where, you know, I'd been practicing yoga for 15 years and decided to do my yoga teacher training and finish that in December. So my spirituality is really this kind of constant process of you know, asking questions, self-reflection, and trying to find some peace in the midst of chaos.
Yeah,
Modern
man.
society.
No, I can see that. Like and like you got your yoga training courses done as well, eh?
Yeah, it was awesome. It's with my friends Joel and Katiana at My Yoga in Victoria. And it's interesting because I've been considering yoga teacher training for a long time, but as a, you know, an Indian Hindu, a lot of yoga studios I just can't, they can't do it, you know.
Yeah, I know, that's pretty funny.
You know, it's
Yeah,
like they're not saying it properly. What are you selling ghee? That's my mom for what, $12 a jar? Are you kidding?
yeah,
You're making
yeah,
kijiri and charging like $15 a plate for that stuff. Man, we ate that stuff when we didn't have any money when I was a kid, and now it's like all in vogue and trendy.
yeah.
And I just have a bit of a problem with that. So my yoga, actually, they really, I think, value and honor the tradition to the extent that I actually won a scholarship. They paid for I got half of my tuition off because they have a scholarship for South Asians and trans people.
Oh,
So
that's
people who are
awesome.
typically like marginalized from yoga, you know, from different communities, there, especially for South Asians, I think, you know, if you don't, I've had one Indian yoga teacher
Oh, really?
in my life, and I've been doing yoga for 15 years.
Damn.
Right. So
Yeah.
anyways, that's my spirituality in a nutshell, I guess.
Yeah. All right. Well, the yoga. I
Yeah.
actually have a comedy bit on that, like how
Ooh, I gotta watch
the
that.
materialism of the yoga world. Like they have like beer yoga now because
Oh my gosh.
of course you need to get a buzz going beforehand.
Don't get me started.
They
I mean,
have
I've done yoga while having a buzz, but it wasn't intentional, you know. But yeah, it's you know, there's a sacredness, I guess, to the practice, and it's and then there's a whole industry surrounding it, right? Like
oh, it's
yoga clothes and the
but
drink juices and stuff.
isn't that what happens when like any kind of materialism or commercialism comes into comes into any kind of spirituality. Once something blows up, like, and it has like, because now yoga is just like something that like so many people are going to find, and there's like money that's attached to that. So that's why this commercialism, materialism comes in, and they try to, they try to take over. Like, now it's like, now it's not like, hey, go do yoga. Now it's like, hey, you got to buy this first before you do that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
No,
It's a package deal.
yeah. I saw goat yoga as well. You've seen that one, goat yoga?
Yeah.
I like how you're just like completely
Yeah.
disgusted.
Yeah, I know. I mean, people have fun doing it, whatever. I don't want to judge people, but it's just a point of, I'm not a fan of call out culture. I think people can be held accountable for things in respectful ways that allows for them to learn from their mistakes and then move on. And then we're like, okay, cool, you get it. But I've just seen some things. I mean, in Victoria, actually, I commented publicly on a post that a local yoga studio, white-owned yoga studio, made with them, and their Christmas sale. It was like a cow doing a headstand with a Santa hat photoshopped onto its foot, and I'm like, and I was like, I saw it. Someone told me about it, and I was like, I don't want no drama, but like, I thought about it, and I'm like, this is just a sacred animal doing a headstand with a Santa hat photoshopped onto it, and you're selling a product that you've turned into a product that my ancestors died for. Fuck that. Sorry, I don't know if you can swear, but I was like, no chance, right? I was like, and so I had a conversation with them, and I held them accountable, and now they're interested in learning more, but there's a limit, and at some point just stop calling it yoga and call it like goat stretching. I don't care. But yoga is a very, like, in Sanskrit, it means union.
Mm-hmm.
It means to unite, and it's a very, it has a very long history of, like, very sacred practice to many people, and I think that we should just remember that.
Heck
and
yeah.
rent.
Yeah. All right. I got to ask you that question of the podcast. So, Robin.
Okay.
God, yay or nay?
Okay, yay. But I have to add a bit to that, because for me, what's really important in both science and spirituality is having a sense of humility and not knowing, and knowing what you don't know. And so that's what really drives my connection. And also, God can mean love, it can mean energy, it can mean connection, it can mean peace, it can mean Mother Nature. So I just kind of, I guess, I would say that I do believe in the concept of God, but how God manifests and the language around that, to me, is still something I'm learning about. And fundamentally, through doing things like yoga and meditating, you get to a place of stillness where you might get closer to understanding what it is that you're even connecting to.
Yeah.
But you'll never get it.
You'll never get it. That's a good one.
No.
That's a good caveat at the end there. You're never gonna get it. But honestly, that's actually not it's better to do that than become like the enlightened guru who's like trying to
Oh
take
my gosh,
advantage of people.
No. I think we're all students, and I think that we're always learning. And the one thing that my PhD taught me wasn't, it taught me a few skills and ways of understanding things, but it also taught me we don't really know too much about anything.
Mm-hmm.
It's a lot of speculation, and I mean, I don't know, like a month ago, I saw the Pentagon was releasing a report on like aliens and stuff. Like, people,
yeah,
they're like, we can't identify these. I don't know, and like, not that I'm a conspiracist, but it's just very evident, particularly when it comes to neuroscience. We still really don't know how the brain really works.
Mm-hmm.
And the technology that we have, from fMRI machines to EEG and all these ways of measuring the brain, are still really not, there's a lot of issues, so I think a sense of humility, whether you're a scientist and an atheist, or a spiritual, or a very, very religious person, is just like, maybe if someone challenges you on something, you should give it a bit of space, because I think you really grow faith and understanding through having your beliefs challenging and sitting in doubt for a while.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree, man.
Mhm.
All right. Let's leave our listeners. I just want to kind of tell them, especially if you're living in cities, you give good advice on like how we can use the cities to for our mental health and stuff. So like one thing I did hear on another podcast, you were talking about even libraries, right? Like how amazing these libraries, like some of these like ones in different cities are. Like what else if people who are alone in a city right now who need to get out, where do you like recommend like get out to these public places and like it's good for your mental health and you'll meet people and socialize hopefully.
Um, I mean, parks, if hopefully they're open in your cities, it varies. And I wrote a piece about this last year, actually, challenging parks being shut down. But anyways, if there are parks, go to the park. Something that I like to do to help me clear my mind and find some peace is riding a bike somewhere where you don't have to worry about getting run over by a car.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like going for hikes. I grew up in Victoria. I feel really lucky to have access to some space where you don't actually see anybody else.
I love
Sometimes
that. Yeah.
sometimes solitude. I mean, social connection is super important, but sometimes a little alone time, in nature is really what the doctor ordered. So I'd say find ways to connect to nature and go look at if there's a area with murals or art or whatever. Just do something outside and get some sun if it's shining.
Heck yeah. All right. Thank you so much, Robin. Please let
Yeah,
my audience know where they can get a hold of you or anything you want to promote. Feel free to do it now.
sure. Thanks. Yeah. Well, I Twitter is at Robin Mazumder, Mazumder, and it's a Robin with an I. You can go to robinmazumder.com. I'm on Instagram. And if you want to email me, just go to my website and there's a contact form, and I'm happy to answer any questions and continue this conversation. I really appreciate you talking about these things.
Heck yeah, man. Thank you so much, Robin. This was so
Yeah.
much fun.
Take care.